Episode 2, Alanis Morissette at Starbucks. Recording date, April 24th, 2023, 10:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
There's a fragrance that's here today, and they call it Charlie. A different fragrance that thinks your way, yeah, they call it Charlie. Kinda young, kinda now, Charlie. Kinda free, kinda wild. Kinda free, kinda wild. Kinda free, kinda wild. Charlie, kinda fragrance that's gonna stay, and it's here now. Charlie.
Charlie by Revlon, a most original fragrance.
What does it mean to be woke? Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologists. I'm Bobby Conway, where we provide credible answers to curious questions. Here with Adam Coleman. It's a term we've heard before, right?
Sure.
Woke, what does it mean?
Well, I think it's important to note that usually when people use that term, they can mean it in a lot of different ways. Now, at its core, I would take it that the notion of wokeness refers to having a sense of awareness of one's ethnic heritage and dignity, as well as maybe some of the past or present obstacles in society that would militate against those kinds of things. I think it kind of flows out of the African American context particularly, but you might see expressions of it amongst Africans of the diaspora more broadly, right? Now, granted, that term has kind of grown in different directions now. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So you might have some who would take it to include things like intersectionality, or maybe they'll couple it with CRT and some of these other ideas. Or you might have some that would apply the term woke to mean like a white person who is empathetic or involved in working against oppression or something like that. Or, again, empathetic to the African American plight or something along those lines. But then you would have people like myself who might use the term woke to refer to just the biblical reality. That in addition to us having this ethnic heritage and dignity, also we have this identity in Christ that we're aware of and have awakened to. And essentially the struggles that are encountered in the world, there's got to be a biblically based response to those struggles. And so we're going to stand against injustice or stand against racism from the vantage point of being a believer and applying the biblical ethic. And so we're going to use the term woke to refer to that set of ideals that derive from Scripture. And so, again, people are going to use the term woke in a number of different ways. And I think for that reason, it's really important that if you encounter somebody who's using that term, to maybe ask some clarifying questions to understand what do they mean when they use the term woke, so that we don't kind of make assumptions and straw man one another and then not really get anywhere in conversations that could otherwise be helpful.
Yeah, you helped me, Adam, and I appreciate it because I had more of a myopic understanding as well in my relationship and friendship to you. You've broadened my understanding in this episode today, so I thank you so much for that, bro.
Yeah, that's what's up.
Welcome to Something Came from Baltimore. My name is Tom Gouker. Remember that Something Came from Baltimore is a jazz, blues, and R&B podcast. It's a radio and podcast, and it's not really about Baltimore. Today we are in episode 2 of 14 as we continue our conversation with Laurie Greene. And if you remember, Laurie Greene is an associate professor of anthropology at Stockton University in New Jersey, where she had taught since 1986. She's the founder and chair of the LGBTQ Youth Safe Space initiative at Stockton University and an advocate for the local LGBTQ community. And she's the author of Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, Contesting Femininity in the World's Playground. Both of us are queer, but even though we are about the same age, our experiences are the same, but then different. We talk about activism, healthcare, trans rights, racism, sexism, and what is wokeism, and more. You can binge this series. It's called Kinda Young, Kinda Wild. It's available in our show links. You can get ahead of the curve and just listen to them at your leisure. Music is by Delight from the amazing 1990 World Click album. Songs are by Bobby Short. Now, let's get into the conversation. Well, this is fun so far.
I was saying about the story that I realized that I love being that person, only whatever white person in this case in the room, when I was in Bali, because it makes me feel the appropriate size.
Great.
I'm insignificant, but at the same time, I feel part of all of it, and I think as people that are part of the dominant group, let's say white people, for example, I think we tend to forget what it's like. We're so comfortable being in the minority that we think we're bigger than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of value in that. I would love to put every person that had a prejudice in a room just with those people, to have to live there, just to see what that felt like. I mean, but then to me, it's a positive experience, at the same time that it's sometimes uncomfortable, because my favorite pictures that I take are the ones of the people staring at me and pointing, or the little boys laughing and looking at me, where they're going, who's that weird person in the weird clothes, Again, it makes you realize your significance, which is minimal, and at the same time, we're part of this giant thing that's so significant, and it's great. I love it.
Like all my previous partners up until like 1996 have all been Black. So for whatever reason, that's what I'm drawn to. So I've been in spaces where I'm the only white person, and I totally recommend, like I know it sounds uncomfortable and weird, but it's nice to be the minority. It's important to not feel like the world's kind of revolving around you, is that you're a part of a piece of the puzzle. I see racism in both cultures. I feel that sometimes I've been in a room where I'm the only white person, and I can feel that they left their guard down. They can say things that they would have never said if other white people were there. But I've been raised with tons of white people, and they can say whatever they want, and I hear it all the time. Coded language or just abruptly like racist language that is considered like acceptable. It's a lot. But that's my preference. I like big, beefy Black guys. If Gerald Levert was still alive, he would be my partner. But that's the way it is, and it hasn't changed. But it has put me in places that a kid in Littlestown, Pennsylvania, that doesn't have any Black people still to this day, with one stoplight, it was a big deal, and it feels like I'm getting more out of it than I ever would by being the minority. And I think 99% of the people wouldn't even bother putting themselves in that position. It would be too overwhelming, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a risk always of fetishizing either another ethnic group or another culture, and it's something that as an anthropologist I try to keep in mind, that, and I tell people this, they say like, oh, they're such spiritual people, let's say. And I say, there's no noble savage, there's no better culture, there's no worse culture, there's just culture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm describing them, but let's not say, oh, they're more spiritual than us. They think of their spirituality differently than us. But they also, they'll say things like, oh, they're spiritual, they're not material like we are. They're material, they're just material differently. There's always that risk, of fetishizing. What we say in anthropology is like, again, the noble savage, making somehow these people are naive and better than us, pristine, not corrupted yet, or whatever you want to say. And, sometimes that's just as bad, so, and again, the only way you can know this is actually to know it, to know people, to know the culture, to experience, you have to be there, you have to go into it and be there. And I think for you, that seems like it happened within the context of relationships. Your guide was your partner, to this direct experience. My guide is my work to this direct experience. But, I always try to keep in mind that I know there's good, there's bad, and there's ugly in everybody. It doesn't matter where you come from. I frequently, especially as a yoga teacher, and also because I've traveled there, I always hear yoga people talk about India in this way. Oh, India, everybody this and that. I want to go to India. And then, I sometimes, if I'm in the mood to be snarky, and sometimes I am, I remind them that India has a caste system which has the worst inequality anywhere in the world in it. India has a caste, and you can see the cruelty every day. It's one of the things that's interesting to me and personally about India is it's a place of the most extreme contrasts that I've ever seen anywhere. And I haven't been everywhere, but for me, for my experiences, you've got the poorest people I've ever seen in my life. And then you've got the richest people. And then you've got these vibrant colors, like everything is so beautiful. And then it's the dirtiest place. Pollution is garbage piled 3 feet high on every curb. People sleeping on the streets with blankets that they rented for the equivalent of a penny for the night, because that's where they live. They have no place to sleep. Bathing in the Ganges with, dead dogs going by in Calcutta, and then, and also, villages of women that I went to one where women who are widowed or divorced, they end up there and no one takes care of them. They just excommunicate them from families, and nonprofits have to take care of these cities of women, because the culture very much gives women no value unless they're married. But they forget all that, yoga people, some of them, when they talk about India, we all have these things. It's cultures they all do the same thing. And so they all have the same problems and challenges. And again, it's one of those things that reminds us again, like we were talking about first, that in essence, humanity is all the same. We just solve the same problems humanity has in different ways, but we all have common problems, common challenges. And what culture is just a way to solve those challenges. But again, no culture is better than another. It's just they've taken a different tact in how they solve these challenges, and the challenges have to make sense together. The way they've solved them, I should say, it has to be a system. It has to make sense. One part has to make sense with the other. And that's how culture is structured. But I can't agree more with you about the experience of being the other, is an important one for everybody to have, for nothing else, for our own humility, to remind us of our own humility, that we should be humble and remember
Definitely. that. It's interesting you're talking about India. I always, because I'm such a music fan, I get really frustrated. Like, I read that Bob Marley, there was a book that came out years ago, and I stopped it in the middle because they were referring to him as like a spiritual, like he came from another world and he's, spiritually gifted, and he was raised that way. And I think they were calling him Nesta. And I was just like, what is this? And then I read a book on Biggie Smalls, and he died, I think, when he was 24, 26, young guy. And they keep on equating on how he was a visionary and he saw the world in a way that transcended like anyone else's vision. And I kept on saying, this guy's a kid. He has, he's not a visionary. He's just a kid who was doing the best he could with what he got. I said he obviously made a lot of poor choices, but that's what kids do. And I think when you create this deity vibe on him, it's a little unfair. There was a Tupac movie that came out that just really made him look like he was just a kid, like kind of feeling his way through, this wave of riches that were given to him, and he just made a lot of bad mistakes. It was very humanizing, and people hated that movie because, he was just a guy, and Biggie Smalls,
like the rest of us.
Yeah. But I mean, like, it's hard to talk to people about Biggie Smalls. I just interviewed Donald Harrison, who was a mentor of Biggie Smalls when he was a little kid. Like, and the words that he showers him about how transcendent he was, and I'm like, come on, he's just a kid. He was interested. He learned things, but that's great.
I mean, there's always the danger. I tell my students this all the time at the university. There's always a danger of making gods of men, because you're always setting yourself up for disappointment because men aren't gods.
Definitely.
We're just people. And that's what always happens is, then you find out Gandhi was abusing his nieces and sleeping with them every night, his young nieces, because he was saying he was practicing celibacy with them. He was challenging himself to see if he could be celibate. That's called pedophilia. I mean, and then people are like, no, it can't be. And you're like, that's what happens. You're setting yourself up for disappointment when you make gods out of men. And if we could just separate the people from needs and appreciate, if we're capable of appreciating their ideas. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes people do things where we just can't look at their ideas anymore, and that's fine. I respect that. I mean, I know people who are like that about Woody Allen. They won't watch his movies anymore. Mm-hmm. Can't appreciate his older movies even because of what they know about him now. And that's fine. I can see why they don't. And I respect that, especially if someone's had an experience surrounding that's traumatizing or particular to them. But I mean, I try, and there's sometimes when I can't too, but I try to appreciate the accomplishments of people and without making gods out of them, like a Prince is a good example for me. Like, I am a huge Prince fan. When you put up that one, you had like a week where you were doing Prince or a few weeks.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I
was like so happy. I was just, because I love Prince. I've loved Prince since I was a kid. We're like the same age, and I know he was a weirdo. I know he got into religious practice that, I wouldn't particularly agree with. I know he was, probably took drugs. I know there's lots of, I think he was a Jehovah's Witness, but that doesn't matter to me because I don't care about Prince the man so much as I care about Prince the music.
Yeah.
But then there's other people that I admire as people, maybe not their music. For example, like Bruce Springsteen. I'm not a huge Springsteen fan. I don't really know any of his. I'm from New Jersey, I live in New Jersey at least. I should know these things, right? But I think Bruce Springsteen's a great guy. So I will appreciate his music for what it is, for pop music to me, So I think it's a shame that people get, and I think it's also why I'm not like what I call a famophile. I never get like freaked out about people like, oh my God, I'm going to meet this person. And if I see celebrities, which I have when I lived in New York City, I still see them, and I still do, if I go into New York City, my son's a playwright. And so I often see people that are famous, even though I don't go up and talk to them necessarily. I never get like that. Oh my God, I always feel like I hope people don't do that and just leave them alone and let them live. That's why they're in New York City and not LA. They just want to be people, and I think it's because I would hate that if I were them. I would just want people to know me and not base who I am on my products of my work. I mean, there's the products of my work and then there's me, and there's some overlap, but it's not complete overlap, and so again, it's just about seeing people as complex as they are. Again, we all have good, bad, and ugly, right? And we're very people are very complicated, and like to make them simple so that we can make them what we want to be, our vision of what they are, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's talented, whether it's a genius, whether whatever. I see people doing this to Trump too. They can't decide whether he's a genius or whether he's a moron. He's neither. He is, I'm sure he's a very complicated, he couldn't be where he is if he was a complete moron, so I'm sure it's much more complicated. I don't like him, so I don't choose to find out what that complexity is, but I'm certain it's there.
We hope it's there. There's some kind of complexity. I was up in New York and I was living in Atlantic City, and this is the first time I lived in Atlantic City. And I took a friend from Florida up, and he was really afraid of the city. He'd never been there before. So we went into a Starbucks, and I wanted to get to, what is that street where all the Fendi bags are fake and stuff? Like it's where it's like a street fair. Can't remember the name of it.
In AC?
In New York City.
Oh yeah. I can't think of it now, but
yeah. Well, it's where it's just all like people hawking their wares. Mm-hmm. And we were midtown, and I was like at a Starbucks, and he was afraid to go into the Starbucks. So I'm standing in line, and I'm talking to this woman, and I'm like, where is that? I don't know if it's Front Street, Market Street, whatever. And I said, where is that? And she was telling me, and I looked at her and I said, you have a Alanis Morissette vibe going on. And she goes, what would Alanis Morissette be doing in standing in line at a Starbucks. And I said, "Oh my God." I said, Alanis Morissette went to India to find herself. She would do anything. And she laughed.
Maybe she
And
wanted coffee.
yeah, she wanted coffee. And I said, "Okay, all right." I said, "Let's go back to our conversation." And I was like, "Look at my friend. He's all scared, blah, blah, blah." We went right back into our conversation because I had a connection with Alanis Morissette and I wanted to know her as a person as opposed to like a fan. And I didn't want to draw any more attention. She just wanted to get coffees. It was
Exactly.
so.
Well, Jean Antolini and I, we met, she met David Bowie and Iman in a deli in New York. They were just like getting ice cream. I mean, they've got to go shopping, right?
Yeah.
That's a great thing. That's the difference between New York City and LA. People go to LA for the paparazzi. People go to New York to live, if they're famous. And I know, I often bump into people that are, famous people in New York, and they're just, I'm so happy people leave them alone in New York, like I said, by and large, right? Because, again, they're just people, they're just, and as much as they like being famous or they need to be famous for their careers, the downside of it is there as well, of course. But of course, they're there to get a cup of coffee. That's why.
I worked at QVC for a couple years and I worked in broadcasting. So I only geeked out on one person, which was George Foreman, where I had to see him. I didn't have to meet him, but he was hawking those George Foreman grills, and I just wanted to look at him, and I was like, okay, I did that. That felt good. And then I also worked at Live at the World Cafe in Philly, so I had always told you leave these guys alone, and Dionne Warwick was in the green room at QVC, and I'm like, I'm gonna leave her alone, but I just want to look at her, and I don't know why. And so I went in there, and she had the snatched, tight body, and she looked beautiful, and it was like, wow, Dionne Warwick. And I said, you look great. I said, I know we're not allowed to talk about, and we're not really supposed to, interact with you guys, and I understand. I said, but you look amazing, and she started laughing at me. And then I said, okay. I said, I'm done with the fandom thing. I'll get back to normal.
It's funny. I have a friend, and I say friend because we're mostly friends on Facebook, although we've met a number of times. My friend Glenn, and he worked forever for the Late Show for Letterman, and then for Steve Colbert when he took it over, and then he retired. And he's met everybody. He did tech, like special effects and stuff like that, and lighting, and every time I see smoke or something, any atmospheric thing, that was him. And he has pictures of himself with everybody, and I always would joke with him, like, oh my gosh, like when he has a picture of him with Prince, and I'm like, I'm so jealous, just because I actually want to meet them like you. If I met Prince, I'd be talking to him about stuff. I wouldn't be like, oh my God, it's Prince.
Yeah.
But he's met everybody, and he says the same thing. They're just people. It's fun to meet them, and it's really honored to be in the presence of somebody I admire, and that's all reasonable. But it's not like the crazy ass fans, that I can't imagine dealing with that. I always feel sorry for them about that. But it reminds me, you probably watched it, but have you seen the David Bowie documentary, where he actually talks about this? Have you seen it? I think it's called Moon Age.
Yeah, I saw it in the movie theater.
Yeah. I thought I loved that documentary because I thought he really expressed that a lot, like what a regular person he was, and how like he really didn't understand the fan thing, the phenomenon of that, and I think everybody who's that famous is sort of like that, and really. Or at least the ones that are intellectually minded, like someone like David Bowie was.
Yeah, he was also like confused about his own creativity. The one thing that is interesting about me doing my podcast, like my degree is radio and TV production. I just had to make money. I stayed away from it, but I've always sidelined myself into some form of creativity or what I thought was creative. And when I started working with the podcast, I'm like, oh, this is feeling good. The creativity in general. It seemed like he questioned his creativity at a certain time period of his life, and desperately was trying to get something back.
Yeah, he
it,
talks about that in the movie. He took a break, but I related to him in the film because he talked about having to move to different places to find something different about himself.
yeah.
And so he was in like London, but then he went to the United States, and then he went, I forget where else. He was in New York, he was in LA, then he went to New York, then he went somewhere else, then he went somewhere else. And every time he went somewhere else, there was a different version of David Bowie that came out of that, And I actually think that's a truism. I don't think that's phony. I think that's a truism about ourselves. It's funny. My best friend probably in the whole universe, who is my co-author for my yoga writing, he's a colleague of mine, Ed Clark. We talk about this quite a bit, that there's an idea in yoga philosophy, at least one branch, that we have a foundational self that is unchanging. And we have all this garbage on top of this foundational self. So we don't know who we are. And what self-realization is at one level is pulling away all the garbage so we can see who we are, this unchanging foundational self. And the two of us don't believe in that at all. I don't believe in it. And I believe he agrees with me that I'm different depending on where I am. My self changes, my self evolves, and it's not being phony. It's just being human, that you can go to a different place and realize that there's a part of you that's different that you haven't expressed before. Mm-hmm. And I just don't believe the other thing because it hasn't been my experience. And what I'm going to trust as a yoga person is my experience first and not what it says in a book, because that is actually ultimately the idea behind yoga philosophy.
Well, I look at it maybe a little differently is, I always said that the fact that like I'm gay, it's a gift. And it's a gift because I had to look at myself as who am I? Why am I on this earth? What can I contribute? I feel a lot of people don't do that, and they just are kind of going along with the flow. And they say they don't do that whatever that self-discovery is. Now you're saying the self-discovery of you changes constantly.
I don't think I go from one spectrum to the other, but I think there's layers of who a person are, and we change according to our, as we grow and we live and we have different experiences, we modify ourselves, to be more true to what we think is us.
I remember working at Vanguard. I had a really good job, and I had this thing where I was interacting with other people who were management, and they all said the same thing. They ran home, they had food at 7 o'clock, they watched TV, and then they went to bed, and they did it every single day. And it was like, wow, this is really boring. And I followed that whole policy of like, you're domestic. This is what a domestic lifestyle is. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And I was like, I'm so unfulfilled by everything that's being offered here, or what they're doing, and it's not working for me.
Yeah, I think that's why one of the things I do, and I joke about this, I always say every year I pick something I suck at and I try to do it, and like, for example, I started Latin dancing because I am such a tomboy. Do you know what Latin dancing is? So girly, like the follower part, women are so like uber stereotype feminine, like the kinds of movements you have to make. And I am, oh my God, I'm such a tomboy. But my daughter was Latin dancing. And I decided that I wanted to go up and surprise her for her birthday to New York City, where she lives, and go out Latin dancing with her. So this is how I met my dear friend, Arlen Padilla. He had a dance studio right around the corner from my house. And I went over there and I said, okay, this is going to be like I'm going to be the most impossible student you've ever had. And I signed up for some private lessons. And after the second lessons, I was in love. And I found out that I'm actually good at it, and who knew, so there's this like girly part in me somewhere that, I just didn't ever express, and I still don't generally on a daily basis, but it's in there, it is part of me, or I couldn't access it, and enjoy it like I do. And I do the same thing. Like I learned, like right now I'm learning French because I tried since I was in high school to learn French. It's the only language I've ever absolutely failed at. And but I also think, especially as we get older, I think always these are the kind of things that keep our brain and our person healthy, happy, and curious. And I think one of the qualities I admire both in myself and in other people the most is curiosity. I think that's what you're saying. Like, to be domesticated just means you lose that curiosity, right? You're not curious anymore. You found the pattern and you're just going to sit with it instead of the thrill. To me, the absolute thrill of meeting a challenge, even if you fail at it, at least you tried, you had the experience of that. Even if you decide, yeah, this isn't, I'm going to finish this course, but this isn't something for me. And because usually you find out there's something you like about it or just something interesting about it, because curiosity comes because things are interesting, right? You discover interest in things. And I think that's what you're saying. There's there's got to be something that keeps challenging you.
Yeah.
You don't just give into it, right? The pattern, the same old pattern.
I tell people all the time, I said, you don't have to have a lot of money to experience different cultures and different things. I said, I would, since I'm a music guy, I would take an Excel spreadsheet and go through all the parks that in the county, and every time they had a free show, which normally they have programs, and I would put it on an Excel spreadsheet. And then I lived in Philly, and when they had stuff down by the waterfront, I would write that down and date it, and people would want my calendar because I'm like, look, for no money whatsoever, you can have this amazing experience. You can now. I'm a big fan of Meetup, where things that scare me, like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do Meetup. At least I get to meet like new people who are willing to do the exact same thing. So I go in and pick categories that I would have never done by myself, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to try it with these people who are trying it also. So it's like a shared thing, and it's basically free. It doesn't cost a cent.
Yeah, it's free and it's freeing, right? Because it's just like you get to exceed what you think are your boundaries. And because we always think they're boundaries, they're not real. And it's, to me, it's exhilarating. I have a little bit of an adrenaline problem. People will tell you, I admit it, but my adrenaline comes because it's not that I do thrill seeking that make things that are dangerous. I always do things I know I can do. I'm very confident that I'm not going to die or be injured doing it. I do things within what I believe is my capacity. But I do things that are dangerous in the sense that I have no idea if I'm going to be good at it, or if I'm going to look like a fool, or if I don't know anything and I'm just trying this from out of nowhere. And to me, that's exhilarating, to try new things all the time and not be afraid if you fail. And I think it takes not being able to be afraid if you fail to want to try those things, I guess.
Oh, definitely. I think that's the inner saboteur for most people, is
that's a nice way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are afraid, will not even try because they don't want to fail. And then they're like, I'm not going to do this because I don't think I'm going to be able to make it happen.
I would never do that. I would never do that. I can't believe you do that. That's what they say to me all the time. I would never do that.
When you were talking about French, what took me right back to 9th grade, where I took French for a year, and somehow I didn't have to take the French 2, and I failed French 1 miserably. And I like the language thing. I don't understand how all these European people have like 4 or 5 different languages, and where they don't struggle, and I'm struggling just with one additional one. Like, where's the blockage on my part where I can't learn 5 different languages? Like, I mean, everyone else can. It seems like.
Well, we don't. I mean, that's a whole nother game, because we don't teach language the right way here. You need to teach language to young kids, not to kids in junior high.
Yeah.
If we teach people in kindergarten, they're fine. They learn it. We teach them when they're at a point in their cognitive development when it becomes difficult to learn a new language. That's all.
Oh, well,
Because
it's
yeah,
also like,
it's not your fault, Tom. It's really not.
I was like, oh my God, these people, like I interview people from Belgium and they're speaking English better than I am. And I'm like, they're like, oh, I'm sorry about my language. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're
I know,
perfect
I
English.
know, I know. And I mean, I speak pretty good Spanish, but when I try to teach in Spanish, it's very hard for me. I wish my language was better. And the same thing with like Italian or Portuguese. I can understand and I can communicate because they're related, they're all related, those languages. So I'm sort of cheating. But I could never fluently speak them. And it's my biggest disappointment or regret is really a better word that somebody didn't give me those things when I was in kindergarten where
Oh
I
yeah.
was fluent. And because my daughter, my oldest child's a daughter, and my daughter Naomi, she's an ENL teacher, world language teacher, and she teaches kids that what they used to call bilingual ed, right? And but she speaks like 5 languages, and she'll just go, "Oh, mom, I'm going to Brazil for 3 months so I can learn Portuguese." Like, and she'll do it. I mean, she's got this talent, flexibility in her brain for it, but it's because she learned it young. She learned the first one, Spanish, young, Italian young. When they were little kids, I was in Italy for a year with them, and they went to school, and they learned Italian. And once that was in their head, that second language pattern, the rest of it was easy if they wanted. It was there. The pattern was there, flexibility. And so she was enamored with it, and that's what she ended up doing. And and I'm jealous because I wish that my parents had taught me a language, one of their languages early on, and the immigrant parents at that time, that's the last thing they wanted to do, right? They wanted you to be American. And I wish that someone had done that for me. And that's our we could do it, Tom. We really can in this country. We just don't want to. We don't have the will, right?
Yeah.
Other
That
things are more important than that. But remember, in Europe, they have to because it's like if someone spoke a different language in Pennsylvania, we'd have to learn it, right? If you're from New Jersey or someone spoke a different language in Virginia, you'd have to learn it. It's too close. And that's what Europe's like.
yeah.
And in those border areas, they speak a combination of the two. They speak these sort of mixed versions. Like in Brazil, they speak what they call Portunal. It's like a mixture of Spanish and Portugal in the areas that Portuguese in the areas that border Brazil that are Spanish speaking. It's not like it stops at the border. It's just so. And that's one of the cool things about language is how it's flexible and how it's always changing. But there's nothing to me more respectful than being able to speak another person's language, when I go there. And I always try to do a little bit of it if I can, and a lot of it, if more of it, if I can. Like when I go to Spanish speaking countries, I try to speak Spanish, even though my Spanish is ugly sometimes, because I know how much people appreciate that and how it expresses the respect that I feel for those people, more so than when I'm just like assuming they're going to be able to speak English, which is one of those ugly American things, the stereotypical ugly American things. Well, why don't they speak English? Like we just expect it, right? But again, that's another thing about, you go live in a place where all they speak is something you don't speak, and that would cure you of that right away.
Definitely.
That kind of hubris, right?
I lived in Philly, North Philly, and it was a Puerto Rican neighborhood. And again, I was an outsider, and I remember like it was yesterday. So I'm watching Telemundo. I'm listening to for speech patterns, and I told the corner shop that I wanted to speak Spanish, and he said, going forward, you have to speak Spanish in here if you want anything.
Yeah.
And it was
Good
like,
job.
yeah. And I was like, what? And I said, Little Debbie. I'm like, I just wanted a Little Debbie, oatmeal pie. So, so, so I was like, okay, I'm up for the challenge. And I thought that was really cool. I feel like if you're immersed in it, like there was a time that I couldn't speak it well, but I knew what they were saying. And that's
Right.
also about facial expressions and stuff like that. So it's just kind of really paying attention to the cues and then the repetitive of the language and that how it was rolling. I was like, I think I'm getting this.
Well, when kids learn language, they're not taught it in the beginning, right? When people learn languages as infants, right? They're just immersed in it, and they figure out the patterns, and they put it all together. There's a cognitive process for that. But, as adults, the only way that we can learn a language is to be immersed in it and have to use it, because language doesn't live on a page. Language is a social vehicle. It's something that, and even when you look at a page, like, we speak ungrammatically all the time. We speak in half sentences. We don't speak out of a textbook, because it's living, right?
Yeah.
And so the best way to learn is just to go there, live somewhere, and have to speak it, right? That's all he was trying to say to you. And it is the best way. And you do start first to understand, and then it's harder to produce, right, than to understand. But I tell my friends who are learning English, and I know this myself, and I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I'm like, nobody cares as long as they can understand you. I said, just forget the tense, forget most of the grammar, put it together, and eventually you get it, if you have to speak. And, no one's going to yell at you. And when I speak Spanish, I always say, people always compliment me on my Spanish and ask me where I learned it. And I say to them, thank you very much, because I only use like present and simple past tense and like progressive for my future. I avoid everything else because it's too hard to remember sometimes. But people don't notice. They're just impressed that they can understand you. And as long as you can understand each other, but you can't be afraid to speak and make a mistake. That's the big deal. I find when I'm trying to learn a new language and in a place, is you just have to do it. They're going to appreciate, and I say to them, do you think if I was trying to speak, this is my friend Val, who learned these 2 years, he learned English, and these last 2 years, his English is amazing now. I'm so proud of him. And when he was trying to learn and embarrassed to speak, I said to him, when I go to Brazil and I try to speak Portuguese, do you laugh at me? Of course not. You're like impressed, and I said, I feel the same way about you. And anybody who doesn't feel that way is just a jerk. You can just ignore them. They're going to make fun of your accent if you speak great English, those same people. So don't worry about them. These people are the people you have to talk to.
This is kind of almost a full circle. We were talking about traveling, but one of the best things to do is go to Puerto Rico and get off of the main drag and experience the country. And that it almost feels like Spanish-like, because they speak in a slang that is almost English-like that you can almost pick up. So you feel like, wow, I'm learning the language really quickly. So it also, it's just great to, I think every American should be in Mexico. It's a part of America.
Yeah, you mean Puerto Rico?
Oh, yeah, I meant that.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Well, language is reflective of culture, language and culture are one and the same. So Puerto Rican Spanish is going to reflect the fact that it's part of American culture, right? And so every Spanish you go to is every Spanish that's spoken is different. When you go around Latin America, and it's really cool to notice those little different things that people say and why. Because I've worked all over Latin America early on in my academic career, and I always loved that, like the little different things. Like, for example, like in Mexico,
Bobby Short live at the Carlisle when in Rome.
When in Spain, for reasons I can't explain, I remain enjoying the view. Please ignore my fondness for Fundador. You know how a Fundador can lead to a few. And baby, when in Rome, I do like the Romans too. If perchance I'm saying farewell to France and romance drops in from the blue, cher amour, I beg of you, please endure my making a brief detour with somebody new. It's just that when in Rome I do like the Romans do. And if in Italy I lie to you prettily, don't think of me bitterly, you know that I'm true. It's just that when in Rome I get that old yen in Rome, and naturally when in Rome I do like the Romans do. If I ride happily, best wishes from Napoli, don't cable me snappily to tell me we're through. 'Cause once again in Rome, in somebody's den in Rome, well, pussycat den in Rome, I do like the Romans do. Once again in Rome, in somebody's den in Rome.
We're dropping these conversations in a timely fashion, but this is binge worthy. And if you're interested in binging, we have the link inside the show notes. The podcast is going to be called Kind of Free, Kind of Wow. And it's available to binge. You don't have to wait. Why would you? End of episode.